I'm going to call this meeting of the Community College Board of Governors to order. Welcome you all to my hometown of San Diego, and I can't tell you how nice it is not to have to get on an airplane to go to Sacramento and have a Board of Governors meeting. And this is obviously a great location here in San Diego, and I'm glad that we're able to have this this meeting, this very important meeting here today. We have a lot of business to get through today, but the first thing I'd like to do is that we as a board have the pleasure of welcoming 3 brand new gubernatorial appointees to our board. And as president of the board, I want to welcome each and every one of you. I think you're going to enjoy your service on this board. We have a great group of members here, and we want to wish you the best. With that, I'm going to introduce each of you and ask you, could you just give us a minute or so, a little bit about yourself, so we can begin to get to know you. So I'm going to start with our voting student member, Jarena Strom.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jarena Storm. I am a student at College of Alameda, and I'm also dual enrolled at UC Berkeley. I am majoring in political science, and my goal is to be an elected official at some point in time within the state of California. I am very interested in California politics, and education is my passion. I'm extremely excited about this most honorable opportunity to continue to serve the students of California, and I believe that public education is the catalyst to assist us all in achieving the good things in life, and I'm so happy to be able to have the chance to represent the over 2 million students in California and make sure that their voice is heard. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Next, I'm going to introduce our non-voting member of the board, another student, Ning Yang.
Hi, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be appointed to the board. I am a student at Mendocino College. I'm currently a psychology major, but I do plan to switch my major to government when I transfer. I've been serving the students in different ways. I was the student body president, as well as has been a student senator with the Student Senate since July of 2010. So serving the students' education is definitely one of my passions, and I too want to be an elected official someday for the state of California. And this education definitely, I hope, something dear to me, because it's something I didn't have the opportunity for when I was younger, back in a different country. So that's something I hold dear, and I hope I will do good on this board.
Great. Thank you and welcome. And now I'd like to introduce our newest faculty representative, and help me again, Joseph Bielansky? Bielansky. Okay.
Yes, Joseph Bielansky Jr. I work in the Peralta Community College District, particularly at Berkeley City College. I've been in the Peralta District 21 years. So currently I'm the articulation officer. Just to say my background and experience, I'm currently the articulation officer at Berkeley City College, and then I have a role as past president of the District Academic Senate and work in the area of institutional effectiveness, which for many parts of the week means assisting with accreditation issues. I started out in disabled student services 21 years ago. I started out at a college that had maybe 8 to 10 full-time faculty members, and as a result, got asked to do a whole variety of things, ranging within 1 year being the curriculum committee chair, to tenure review committee chair, to matriculation, and then it went on. I've also had the good experience of being on state academic senate committees, which helps to get a bigger perspective from a statewide level. And I also have the good fortune right now of being a commissioner on the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges.
Great. Thank you and welcome.
My focus will be students.
Okay. I also would be remiss if we did not take a minute to congratulate our colleague Manuel Baca on his reappointment as a faculty member by Governor Brown. So, personally, Manuel, I'm so delighted, as your other colleagues are as well. So, with that, welcome to everybody, and let me just make a.
Scott, would you like me to do roll?
I would love that, Steve.
Okay.
Please call the roll.
Manuel Baca.
Here.
Jeffrey Baum. Natalie Berg.
Here.
Benita Haley. Danny Hawkins. Here. Scott Himmelstein.
Here.
Lance Azumi. Peter McDougall.
Here.
Deborah Malumed.
Here.
Alice Perez.
Here.
Henry Ramos.
Here.
Gary Reed. Urena Strum.
Dorina Storm.
Jurina Storm, I'm sorry.
Here.
Joseph Belansky.
Here.
And Nina Young. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Also, for those of you in the audience, if you would like to make a public comment, see Steve Bruckman over there. He has the sign-in sheets. And with that, I'd like to make a couple of comments. When Vice President Perez and I talked with the Chancellor and we decided to hold this special meeting, it was really for the distinct purpose so that board members here could be as informed as possible as we prepare to take a vote in January on these recommendations. So I think we view this as an opportunity primarily for the board to understand, to ask questions of the task force, debate amongst our self, and be, as I say, as informed as possible as we consider these recommendations. We are obviously very, very interested in what the public has to say. We will allow time for that, but I'm going to do that after the board has had a presentation and a thorough discussion amongst itself. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Chancellor for some opening comments.
Oh, well, thank you a lot, Scott. I remember some years ago reading the book called The Art of Loving by the well-known psychologist Erich Fromm. And in that book, I remember his talking about the fact that change is the nature of life, that the love of life is connected with recognizing that the world changes, and that if we don't change, we are, in a sense, necrophils, that we are unwilling to face up to the reality of the living world in which we live. And I've been fortunate since 1973 to be connected with California community colleges. And I've seen lots of changes. This institution has adapted very, very well to a lot of things that have occurred. I remember the whole phenomenon of the returning woman, and how many of our students suddenly were adult women who came back maybe as a result of a change in their marital status or other things, and they became certainly among our finest students. And of course, we adapted to the change, occasionally some from the outside that we didn't have a lot of control over. I think of 1978 and the passage of Prop 13. But then, of course, we had Prop 98, which gave us an assured part of the state's revenue along with K through 12. So we've had to adapt to, of course, the harshness of state budgets. That 2 years ago we took an 8% cut, and this year we took a 5% cut, and we know that there's a possibility in mid-year that we may take another $100 million cut. And one of the changes that's not only going on in California community colleges, but in the national community college movement, is the whole emphasis on student success. This is not something that is merely California, but it's a recognition that the community colleges had been a wonderful model of access. But we began to look at statistics and we began to realize that we could work on the whole issue of success, making sure that the students who come to us are able to achieve their goal of a certificate, of transfer, of getting an associate degree, or in some instances, taking enough courses just so that they could get some retraining. And we've had to adapt, of course, to a decreasing source of revenue, which means simply that we can't offer all the courses that we once did. So Senate Bill 1143 was passed, and in this bill, it simply said that we are to form a Student Success Task Force, and that this Student Success Task Force would be appointed by the Board of Governors, which it was, and that in turn, they would work together for an entire year, and they would eventually present recommendations to that Board of Governors, which we intend to do in January. And then we'll see about whether they're to be amended or changed. Now, once this task force met, and it had 5 faculty members, 3 college presidents, representatives from trustees, from students, from a whole host of groups, as well as some outside groups that could help us, a business leader, a state senator, some other individuals. So we met, and we were fortunate enough to bring in a lot of outside experts, but really, most of the work we did was done within the task force itself. A lot of robust discussions occurred. We came up with 22 recommendations, and then we vetted those recommendations. We went out, we had 4 town hall meetings. We appeared before all kinds of groups, the Academic Senate, the CTA Convention, the CEO Board, the trustees, special groups such as the CSSOs and the CIOs, and the group, and we made over 30 appearances, and we got lots of suggestions. And we took quite a number of those suggestions. We made some changes, and they'll be discussed today as we heard from individuals, and they suggested to us ways in which we could improve these recommendations. So we have had a very thorough vetting of this particular, the recommendations of this task force. And now have gone back after our vetting process, and we've come today to present a updated recommendation. Now, we asked 2 members of this Board of Governors to serve on that task force, Manuel Baca and Peter McDougall. And Dr. McDougall was willing to serve as the chair, and he chaired this whole task force meeting, and he did it with a great deal of ability, listening to a whole host of ideas, and did it really as a volunteer. He's a Board of Governors member, a retired community college president, having served over 20 years as the president at Santa Barbara City College. And so he has spent, I started to say hours, but he spent, of course, days and days on this particular thing. So we're going to ask Peter today to present these recommendations with some of the ideas that have come forward. Sitting beside him is Amy Supinger. We were able to get someone who was willing to spend full time. We were able to get some support, and so she has spent full time. And when you look at these, all of the great work that's been done in terms of putting together documents and so forth, we have to say that Amy's been the one who's done the work. So they're the 2 sitting at the table, prepared to present these recommendations today. So I'll just turn it over to you, Peter.
Dr. Scott, thank you so much. It's a little strange to be on this side of the table at a Board of Governors meeting, but I would like to start just by giving thanks in 3 areas. Number one, the Chancellor, both for myself and Dr. Baca, for the opportunity to serve on this task force. I think it's been a wonderful experience. We've enjoyed it very much. It's had its challenges, but I think all of us are convinced who have served on the task force of how very important this study is to the California community colleges and the potential that it has. I also want to thank Dr. Scott and the Vice Chancellors for their unyielding involvement with and support of the work of the task force. It would not have had the credibility or the effectiveness that I think, whatever effectiveness we've had, without that level of support. So appreciate that very much. Before just jumping into the changes, I'd like to take a couple of minutes, and I will try to be brief on this, but I think it is important to create a bit more of the context within which this report is being delivered. So I'll try to be brief in creating that.
But Peter, if I could interrupt for
Yeah.
a minute, I would agree. I think it's important, particularly since we have 3 new members.
Right.
That certainly on some level, you give an overview of the recommend, whether it's you or Amy or whatever that mix is, but also note specifically where the changes have occurred and what those changes are.
We definitely will deal with the latter issue as the key part of the presentation.
Okay.
But again, just a little bit on the context. As I see it, the purpose of the task force is really an acute recognition that the wonderful access that we have had in the California community colleges for the citizens of the state of the community colleges is something that's very special, but it's insufficient in terms of what we need to be achieving. We cannot have access without success. And as we have looked more deeply, and frankly, as others have looked more deeply at what has happened to our students after enrollment, we have too many, if you will, casualties. We have too many individuals who are not experiencing the success of successful course completion, transfer, associate degree in technology, et cetera, that the objectives that the system has are not being accomplished to the extent that we could. So most fundamentally at the center of the focus is the success of our students and how we might build on what has already been done within the system to have greater numbers of students succeeded. And I think it's equally important that we look at that in the context of the changes in the state of California. For example, in page 13 of the report, it talks about projections from the National Center for the Higher Education Management System, NINCHMS, and found that California's changing demographics, of which we're all very much aware, combined with low educational attainment levels among fast-growing populations, will translate into substantial declines in per capita income between now and 2020, placing California last among 50 states in terms of change in per capita income. So we have to have, all of us who feel such a strong investment of the community colleges have to have the system working more effectively. In addition, we have probably an unprecedented series of actions that are taking place on the national level, from President Obama and his initiatives through the U.S. Department of Education and all of that Secretary Duncan is doing with the able assistance of Martha Cantor from California, and the governors, the associations of community colleges, the various states, and many foundations. All of them are embracing, because of the significance to our country and because of the significance, most of all, to individuals, that we have to change, we have to be more effective than we have been. So certainly it's important to California, and obviously it's critically important from a national perspective as well. Just very briefly, I think the Chancellor did an excellent job of outlining the membership of the task force and what we have done over the last 12 months. And I do want to acknowledge within that the work of the Board of Governors and how much time the board has put into this. And I do think it's important to recognize that not only has the board stayed abreast at every meeting of getting an update, but the board retreat that was conducted in September, a major portion of that board retreat was spent on the work of the task force, almost a good part of a day where board members had the opportunity of doing that. Then we had a board meeting, the last board meeting, we spent a considerable amount of time on it. Today, very unusual, but I think appropriately, we're having a special board meeting on this singular topic. And so I think it is to the credit of the board and President Himmelstein, your leadership, that we are taking the time that is necessary to look at something that's so important to the system. So with those brief comments on context and also highlighting the thoroughness of the board's attention to this topic, let me go through some of the broad-based changes in the report that have occurred since our last meeting. The Chancellor highlighted the work that had taken place on the town hall meetings, Los Angeles, Fresno, Oakland, et cetera. In addition, and I just remind the board of this as well as our new board members, there was online access for everyone in the community college. All colleges knew of it and had tremendous opportunity to provide feedback online to the specific recommendations as well as through the town hall meeting. The point being the principle of transparency, the principle of clarity of the community of community college professionals and all those affected by it being completely aware of what the recommendations were and having the opportunity to provide feedback was a central premise to how we operated in addition to all of the meetings which were open as well. But since the last meeting, and the board members will recall, we had the last meeting in Sacramento in the Capitol building, and following the 2 days of meetings, we had the next to last full-day meeting of the task force. And the following took place as a result of the discussion and action at that meeting. But this was informed, these actions were informed by the feedback at the town hall meetings as well as the feedback received online. It wasn't just a discussion at that meeting. First of all, one of the most significant changes that was agreed to by the task force and that is reflected in the updated report, I believe that Dr. Skinner has provided for everyone today, Vice Chancellor Skinner, was categorical program consolidation. You will recall there was a recommendation to consolidate many of the categorical funding programs. The feedback from the field very strongly expressed concerns that consolidating them would weaken them and that it would diminish student support in a number of areas. And as a result of that, the recommendation to consolidate the categorical programs was removed and replaced with urging state leaders to streamline the administration and reporting requirements of these programs. Did you want me to?
Can I just make a suggestion? Perhaps you can just do a very high level of each of the changes, and then as we go into the overall report, maybe we can have a more in-depth discussion at that time. So, because otherwise I think we're going to be duplicating dialogue.
Okay.
So maybe you could just do high level on this and then let Amy go into the more detail as we go through each of the
Yeah,
sections.
I believe I believe you have an actual copy of what has taken place there. So as much as staying to the board, I'm sensitive to the audience as well and bringing them up to date on what has happened, because there has not been broad-based communication of that as of this point. So that was a very important modification to the report. I think the bulk of the concerns that were expressed at the public meeting were in this area, in the area of categorical programs, and I think the response is an appropriate response for where we are right now. The second area was in terms of career development and college preparation non-credit courses that were referred to earlier. And there was a very acute recognition that limiting non-credit courses to the vocational or college prep areas would have serious and not positive ramifications. And as a result, that was changed, and that it's very clear that citizenship, English as a second language, and other courses would, under non-credit, will continue. And in addition, there's work that's being done, and the task force at its last meeting on December 7th will be finalizing the recommendation in that area. But it has, I think, been modified to address a majority of the concerns, but there's still work to be done on that. A third category was requiring students to pay full costs for courses not in their educational plans. That too was modified, removed. It did not make sense to the task force members to have two-tiered fee plan operating, that this is an issue that needs to be taken care of in other ways. The issue of professional development describes the current system, calls for development of one that's more robust, and there is a small group that is working on that and will be altering those recommendations to an extent to, I think, make it more effective in supporting broad-based, college-based staff professional development, but also with strong recognition of what the needs are for the state, and that those be incorporated in the local plans. I think I mentioned or referred to earlier the need to draw a distinction between basic skills classes and ESL. That has been addressed in the report. The issue of alternative funding model for basic skills. Again, it was the task force, the recommendation was modified, and rather than broad statutory changes, the chancellor would be provided with the authority to develop alternate funding allocations in that areas, and a subgroup of task force and staff members will craft the specific language for that. And then in addition, I think the tone
Excuse me,
and...
Peter.
Yeah.
Group of task force and staff members will craft the language that will be brought to us in
The
January.
final report in
Got it.
January.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's actually in this one. It's in this version,
Is it-
craft day.
is it
We're
in-
now in past tense.
Okay, that's
Okay.
what confused me, okay.
And then last, I think there were some issues about tone that existed in the introduction. The introduction has been redefined, and I think deals appropriately with what has to go, what sets the framework for the report itself. I think it's quite positive. That's a rather rough overview. I think what should be most important to the board is that the task force as an entity took it very, very seriously the feedback received at the town hall meetings, the written correspondence that was sent to the task force, and the appearance before the task force of various people, and substantially altered some of the recommendations, and from my perspective, not losing the thrust and the benefits that were accrued in the report itself. So let me stop there, and then if there's a need for additional background, we can go ahead. But let me just add one other caveat. I want to ask if Amy, do you want to add anything, Amy, at this point?
Okay. Maybe at this point, are there any questions of Chairman McDougall on these changes before we have Amy walk us through the overview of the new document? Member Baum.
I just want you to restate what you said at the end, is that these changes, you don't feel completely dilute a lot of the major reforms that are being proposed for student success.
Yes, that I do not feel that the changes that are being made will not impact it negatively. In other words, the report will still have the force and effectiveness that it had, Jeff. Because most of the recommendations were to take away from what we had originally proposed, but I think they were, not only myself, that's not, the full task force felt they were appropriate.
Other members? Questions, comments? Let me ask you, Peter, which of these, in your view, and or maybe the task force view, is the most significant of the changes? And how would you characterize the task force's ascension to them?
Characterize the task force's
Agreement.
when you have 20 people who represent very divergent views,
Yeah.
I would say the agreement is a very sound agreement. I think there is clear alignment on the superordinate, if you will, purposes that the task force, I mean, obviously the superordinate goal of great students succeeding, but I think there's also agreement on the major areas as being the appropriate areas that needed to be addressed to be more effective in having more students succeed. So is there a clear consensus behind every one of the recommendations? I would say not necessarily, but there's a clear level of support that I feel is present.
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of following up on Member Baum's comment, and I need to study these more, as I'm sure I do other members, but I do want to make sure that these changes, and I don't understand them all yet, but I will, do not significantly, quote-unquote, water down what was done, and it helps a lot for me to understand the task force's position on making these changes.
I would almost put it in 180 degrees differently. I think that one of the critical factor for long success on the implementation side is that the report is felt to be credible.
Okay.
The report has a basic level of support on the campuses. And a couple of the issues that we modified may have threatened those two outcomes.
Okay.
And I think because we have, because we have modified them, without necessarily adversely affecting what the outcome would be. I mean, one could argue that consolidation of, for example, of categorical programs is really the best thing to do. And then one could argue very strongly on the other side that there are good reasons for not doing that. And I think the task force decision that there are very good reasons for not doing that at this point is a correct decision. What may happen down the line as we deal with the kind of funding challenges that the system has had to confront, that's another issue. But I think for the present time of moving in after the report hopefully is adopted by the board in January and reviewed with the legislature, that moving into the implementation stage, it will have the college leadership behind it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Supinger.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Do I need to move the mic closer, or are we
Move it a little closer, yes.
better?
Yes.
I can move it one step closer. So thank you. My name is Amy Supinger. I have had both the privilege and the pleasure of serving as the executive director for your Task Force on Student Success for the last 11 months, 12 months now. As you know, this is a year-long process. The group had its first meeting in January. They have met monthly since then, and they spent the first roughly 6 months of the process really sort of gathering information, talking to national experts, really trying to take a look at what works to try to get students to the finish line, whatever that finish line may be. They spent several months looking at what their recommendations would shape up to be, refining those, and then have spent the last 6 to 8 weeks out gathering input from the field, talking to various parties at conferences, public town halls, and the like. So all told, in the last I think we're now to 8 weeks. We have been at about 30 conferences. We've held 4 public town halls. So we've talked with a lot of folks. So you have in front of you 3 pieces of paper, I hope, or I think. You have a copy of the report.
Yes.
You have a copy of a one-pager that looks like a listing of recommendations. I'm getting some blank stares.
That one we don't have.
Okay, perhaps Mr. Skinner can
Yeah.
help me and pass that one out. That's my cheat sheet.
Okay.
And then you have the memo that talks about what the changes were from the prior version of the report. So those are the 3 handouts we have for you today.
Thank you.
So all in all, we think that the 22 recommendations that are included on the list and comprise the report really help the system, the community college system, focus on its core missions of workforce preparation, transfer, and degree completion and basic skills. We have asked folks, to the degree that they can, to try to look at those recommendations in their totality, to look at all of them and to not sort of cherry pick them apart. That's incredibly difficult. I recognize this. It's sort of like handing out a list with people's names on it, and you immediately look at the list for your name and your program. But as you think about this, and as we talk about it today, try your best to try to think a little bit more globally. So we don't want to do all of the talking today. The whole point of this day is actually for you all to do the talking. So if it's okay with the chair, I'll just do a quick rundown of these recommendations, give you sort of a high-level discussion point. And I recognize that most of you are very familiar with this report, with the document. You've been following this process for the last 12 months, but there are several new members. So if I'm either too specific or not specific enough, please holler at any point in time, and I'll adjust the altitude at which I am speaking. So 22 recommendations. They are divided into about 8 categories. We just recently added a 9th category that you'll see at the bottom. The first thing that we want to talk about is increasing college and career readiness. So the biggest issue here is that, as you are all well aware, anywhere between 70 to 90% of first-time students showing up at community colleges who take assessment exams require remediation in English, math, or both. As we speak, the K-12 State Board of Education is in the process of developing new Common Core Standards for College and Career Readiness, affectionately referred to as just Common Core in its shorthand. So the last time that K-12 developed standards, it was the high school exit exam. And we all know how well that turned out for those of us in higher education. They developed an exam that really was aligned with, well, nothing, quite frankly. And students have a completely mixed message about what it takes to graduate from high school, what it takes to be ready for college. And industry is concerned about students getting the skills they need to enter the workforce. So recommendation 1.1 and all of chapter 1 essentially talks about the need for community colleges, in higher education in general, but community colleges in particular, to get at the table with K-12 now. As K-12 is going about its work, and make sure that we are the ones to define with our K-12 partners what college ready means. And also, and if you have heard Dr. Mike Kirst, the president and chair of the state board, talk recently, he was the keynote at the Community College League conference last week before, you will know that he has, they seem to be very much struggling with how to define career readiness. So this is one area that they are specifically looking to the community colleges to. So the recommendation, to use a bit of a sports metaphor, is community colleges get in the game. Chapter 2 talks about strengthening support for entering students. And by and large, the bulk of this report is really focused on the student services side of our operations. For better or worse, and there's no judgment attached to that, just a statement of fact. So there are 5 discrete recommendations here, but they really all work together. The biggest one is really recommendation 2.1, which talks about the development and implementation of a common, centralized, and diagnostic assessment. Now, that's a lot of adjectives before the word assessment, so let's walk through what those are very quickly. Common, meaning generally, and let me go back, assessments, plural. So we're not talking about just one single exam that's going to do a gazillion things. But assessments meaning that everyone will generally use the same kinds of, the same assessment exams. That's the common part. Centralized, meaning that we would run the administration of those exams, generally the procurement and all of the costs associated with it centrally. Would free up resources for local colleges to spend their money on something else. It's a very expensive venture, and we've been hearing some rumblings from some districts that are going to stop doing assessments because it's so expensive. And diagnostic, which is the key piece. So rather than just simply saying what my proficiency level might be in math, my instructor would know that I don't know fractions. And in particular, that might be my math deficiency rather than simply placing me in the equivalent of a 6th grade math class. Recommendation 2.2 requires students to take that assessment, requires them to take orientation, engage in orientation, and to develop education plans. Now, in all of these cases, we can all sit around this table and the audience as well and come up with myriad examples of the student who should be exempted from this. So if I were to go back to community college today because I want to be a radiological tech, the odds are I should not have to take a placement exam. Presumably, my baccalaureate degree and my master's degree would exempt me from that. In all of these cases, we are very explicitly allowing for local exemptions. So the campus, the district, has the ability to say to a student, you know what, we recognize this is a requirement, but you are exempt from this because your circumstance is special. By and large, this is a state and a system that has made its policies based on the student who is the exception to the rule rather than the bulk of the students who are the rule. The same thing applies for orientation, and the same thing applies to the development of an ed plan. Let me just take a step, well, actually, I'll continue, sorry. 2.3, develop and use technology applications to better guide students. So we're asking all students to complete ed plans, we're asking them to go through orientation, we're asking them to take assessments. Clearly, we need to hire a lot more counselors and advisors to be able to do that. We don't profess that technology is the panacea. However, technology does have a role to play in our system, not just in meeting the need of students, the increased need of students for these services, but also because today's students, today's younger students in particular do have an expectation about what technology provides them with. They use laptops, they're online, they do their research online. I don't know the last time I saw a set of hardbound encyclopedias anywhere. We all do things on our smartphones. So to acknowledge that that is the world we live in, and in some cases, allow students who are more self-guided and more self-directed to do some of those kinds of education planning activities online, thus freeing up counselors for the higher needs students, is part of the recommendation. It feels a bit like a triage approach in some ways, but that is what you're talking about when you want to provide services to every single student and you don't always have the resources to do it. Was there a hand up over here? No? Recommendation 2.4 requires students showing a lack of college readiness to participate in student support resources. One of the speakers that we had early on in our process was Dr. David Connolly with the University of Oregon, who spoke a lot about this concept of college knowledge, which is what students know about financial aid, about maneuvering through large bureaucratic systems, about study habits or the habits of mind, the kinds of things that it takes to be a successful student. What we say in this recommendation is students who are not proficient in those areas should participate in some kind of student intervention or student success course or some kind of a student support resource. We don't say what that resource is. We offer some examples, but we don't mandate that colleges use a particular one. But examples include student success courses that I think you all have some familiarity with, the use of cohorts, in the academic setting. Perhaps they're just seminars, a shorter term seminar, just depending upon what the student's comfort level is. Recommendation 2.5 requires students to declare a program of study early in their academic careers. So there's a distinction here that I would like to make between program of study and education plans. And we're trying to make sure that our writing on this is clear, and hopefully this draft helped that a bit. So program of study is what we would all traditionally think of as a major, an area of concentration. And one of the things that the research has shown, in particular Nancy Shulock and Davis Jenkins, has shown that the sooner students get in a program of study, a path, and establish their intent, the more successful they are. Even if they change, and we certainly are allowing students to change, we're not saying we want you to declare your major when you're 18 years old and by God you're never changing it. I think we can all look around the table and count the number of times we all made those changes. That is not the intent. But when you look at the work that's done locally in the K-12 area with charter schools or magnet schools, that even in something like a performing arts school where students go on to do something completely different, just being in a program of study increases their success rate substantially. An education plan then is the roadmap that gets the student there. So, if you think of that as your kind of course by course, your semester by semester plan or your guidebook that gets you. So I just wanted to make that distinction up front. Any questions so far? I'm moving a little fast.
I have a comment because I just want to comment as we're going along opposed to waiting to the end. But I agree with, the recommendations around the assessments and so forth, but I think what's really important that I don't see embedded in here is currently today when students are getting ready to, graduate high school, they study for SATs. There's actually classes to help them prepare for it. There's nothing like that currently out there today for the community college assessments. And a lot of times these students are coming into this not totally prepared for them as they would for the other types of tests that they're taking. So I would really encourage looking at some language around working with K-12 or other, organizations to have some type of preparatory courses for these students to prepare for these assessments. Because what I found too often is that students don't prepare, they don't score well, but the reality is it's not that they don't know the material.
Yes. So I think, since I'm the person with the mic, I think the task force not only agrees with you, but wholeheartedly agrees with you, and we actually have a bullet in recommendation 2.1 that talks about, the bullet specifically reads, design a centralized assessment system that includes a robust array of options to help students prepare to take the assessments for the most valid result. So, I mean, when we specifically look at how to design that assessment, we're looking at how to design pre-test preparation as well as retest policies.
Very important, you're right.
Member Malamed, did you,
Yes.
please?
You didn't take a long enough pause after the first
Sorry.
chapter. That's okay. And I do want to ask I want to ask you for more detail. For example, on page 21, what are specifically the things you talk about, more leadership needed to ensure that we have membership in key committees that will plan and execute the definition of standards and establish formal and regular channels of communication. What specifically, above and beyond what we're doing now? I'm looking for more detail. How can we do this?
21.
So the task force didn't get to that next level, I think, of this in terms of altitude.
Okay.
So they didn't get to that sort of ground level. But one of the conversations that they had, and one of the things that we've consistently heard from Dr. Kirst at the state board, is the need to establish formal and regular channels of communication between community colleges and the state board. So for you all, that might sound and look like a joint board meeting, but I think what he's talking about is something much deeper and much more on the ground. And whether, the part of the problem is K-12 doesn't have an academic senate, but the ability to sort of get faculty together on the statewide level, the ability to just establish those ongoing relationships. So the big fear is that with Common Core, that community colleges and K-12 will work together, they'll come up with something hopefully great, and then that process will be complete and everyone will walk away and those interactions will cease. So it's being able to kind of keep that dialogue ongoing and constant. But you're asking specifically, what does that look like? And I don't think we have an answer to that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Chancellor Scott.
You'll find throughout this report that we often use the word encourage. There's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, we're not in the business of mandating. I think one of the greatest outcomes of this whole enterprise will be the discussions that will occur on local college campuses around student success. And they'll have a lot of ways in which they'll encourage student success that aren't in this report. In other words, we realize that if I use an example from my past, I would say, okay, Pasadena City College, do what you can to encourage discussions with the neighboring high schools so that they'll understand what you expect when individuals come out with what level of English proficiency or what level of math proficiency. But, we would be loath to say, you must spend 20 hours or whatever. We're not doing that, but we are recognizing that if we have to deal with remedial education. Wouldn't it be wonderful if instead of dealing with so much remedial education, if, like in the case of health, we did a lot of prevention? And the prevention would have to be the English teachers at Pasadena City College sitting down with the English teachers at Pasadena High School and saying, this is the level of grammar or writing skills that we expect when somebody comes here. And a lot of our colleges have already initiated this. It's remarkable how it's worked. But if you find some of this language, we'll say, without a great deal of specificity, one is it would have taken a great deal of time to spell that out. And secondly, we really recognize that in a local college campus, there's a lot of experience, wisdom, and they're familiar. All we want to do is to encourage this to start happening, because now sometime, we in the community college sit there and sort of, blame the high school, and the high school hasn't heard from us exactly what it is we expect. So that's all it is. And
Well,
I
that
just want you to
helps.
understand
Right.
that a lot of these, some of these things we're calling for regulation, some of these things the task force is calling for even statute, but some of these things are just encouraging best practices.
Well, that helps me because I was trying to envision, were you talking about the Chancellor's Office personnel, talking to the Department of Education personnel, but you're also saying very local level, so that
Very
helps me.
local level.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
So was there anything else? You know, Chapter 2 had certainly a lot of meat in it. I don't want to move forward onto Chapter 3 if, okay. Chapter 3, incentivizing successful student behaviors. This chapter grew out of several things. First, the work of Dr. Kay McClinney from Texas, who sort of coined the phrase, students don't do optional, and our colleagues at the Community College League, who had students don't do optional as one of their recommendations on their commission in the future. Our task force took that a step further and developed 4 discrete recommendations that we think get at that point. The first talks very specifically about enrollment priorities, and I know as a board you have had many conversations about enrollment prioritization. But generally, this recommendation is about having the system adopt enrollment management policies that encourage students to follow delineated education pathways that are most likely to lead to the completion of their educational goal. So we prioritize enrollment for students that meet certain behaviors, and we bounce other students sort of to the bottom of the prioritization line. So as the Chancellor talks about the current prioritization, continuing students are first in the queue, sort of regardless of their educational goal, and that puts, you know, folks who are taking, I don't know what our examples are, ukulele for seniors at the top of the list, and someone who's an incoming freshman who needs basic skills math at the bottom of the list. So this reconfigures the priorities to better align with the mission of our system. Recommendation 3.2 talks about the Board of Governors student fee waiver. In particular, the federal government and the state government both put requirements on students generally, our students in particular, for making academic progress, for completing a specified not allowing them to exceed a certain number of units, and the like. And the task force felt that it was only appropriate that our own Board of Governors fee waiver adopt similar kinds of requirements. That said, the proposal here under recommendation 3.2 is much looser than the federal Pell Grant requirements. And is really designed to trigger interventions. One of the things we heard from our own systems financial aid officers with the Pell Grant that was helpful was when students weren't making academic progress, it wasn't that Pell kicked them off the grant program, it was that it triggered an intervention, and that it required, and that there was a financial incentive for the student to come in and sit down and meet with someone. And that was the piece that really resonated with our folks, and hence the BOG fee waiver recommendation. Recommendation 3.3 talks about providing students with the opportunity to consider attending full-time. We know that by and large, full-time students complete their programs faster. They do better academically than part-time students. The piece that really resonates with me, we don't quote it in our report, but that I found most compelling was Stan Jones with the Complete College America program came and spoke with our group, and he said nationally the research shows that students don't work and go to school, they work in order to go to school. And those are two completely different things, which tells you that they're working in order to finance their education. And so perhaps something as simple as laying side by side for them what a full-time, what their financial aid package would look like if they were a full-time student versus a part-time student and could pick up, you know, some Pell money and maybe a Cal Grant B subsistence award or the like, might be able to help them with that process. Recommendation 3.4 requires students to begin addressing basic skills deficiencies in their first year. We're not saying that students have to complete their basic skills deficiencies in a year because, as we know, many students arrive well below one level of deficiency. But what we found is that the sooner students address their math and English basic skills issues, the more rapidly they are able to progress into collegiate level coursework, and the more successful they are in that coursework. So we are requiring them to at least start that process in their first year. Was there a question? No?
I do have a question.
You looked.
I looked puzzled. I have this question about the matter of the BOG fee waiver. What do we know about the percentage of our students that are receiving that waiver?
Is it about 40%?
Yes.
I think it's roughly.
Closer to 50%.
So
Closer to
roughly
50.
half.
It's, yeah, during the recession.
Okay. So what is the rationale for requiring these students to meet various conditions and requirements rather than all students to meet conditions and requirements that are part of the strategy of this initiative? It's not clear to me why that distinction draws out.
So the only so this recommendation only makes one there's only one difference between what you require of all your students and what you require of BOG students. So in the BOG statutes, you don't actually have requirements on moving students through the system, and satisfactory academic progress requirements vary by campus. So what this recommendation says is that we think that the requirements for BOG students need to be consistent with the campus's policy for all students. The one place where it differs is on the unit cap. So under recommendation 3.2, we say that students in excess of 110 units are no longer eligible for a BOG fee waiver. We do not kick students out of our system if they have exceeded 110 units. However, under our enrollment priorities, we do send them to the back of the line. So by and large, this is designed to treat our BOG waiver recipients the same way we are treating our non-BOG waiver recipients.
Okay. It's a little bit lost on me why that's not happening already, but I take you at face value that it needs to be adjusted.
There's probably someone that can answer the why it's not happening already question better
Okay,
than I
no
can
worries,
if you want to
no
talk
worries.
about that. Yeah, Linda's right here. Let's.
Actually, I'd appreciate that, Linda, because I'm interested in this as well, and then I have a follow-up question to Member Ramos.
Oh, she's got it.
Historically, the BOG fee waiver program was created as purely an access program. The maximum value was $100 a year. And so when we established it, we did not put satisfactory progress requirements on students' receipt of the BOG fee waiver, which already made it unique from all other financial aid programs. What the proposal is, coming from the task force, is that we essentially establish one standard of what it means to be in good academic standing, and that is that you don't go on probation for failing to have at least a 2.0 or failing to complete 50% of your units for 2 consecutive terms and maintain good academic standing. So what happens to all students if they do in fact go on probation for 2 terms under this scenario is they lose their enrollment priority, so they'd go to the back of the line, and they would lose eligibility for their BOG fee waiver. So, I think we are applying a common standard. The one difference is that if you assume that students with no enrollment priority are still going to get into some courses, then the students who can afford to pay for those courses can get in, and the students dependent on the BOG fee waiver can't. So that is one element of discrepancy, but I would have to say that double standard applies to all financial aid programs. The progress standards for a Pell Grant or a Cal Grant or any other financial aid are significantly more strict than what institutions have applied to all students. So this is not a difference in policy in that regard.
I would also, I apologize, I would also add that the unit cap that the task force put on this one, that the 110 unit cap is higher than what the federal government has, which I think is 90, is that correct?
90.
So we wanted to make sure that there was some wiggle room, clearly not a technical term, because we were concerned about, we didn't want to just kick students off the grant when they reached a maximum. We wanted to make sure we had due process provisions for campuses for students to appeal and the like. So we built a lot of room in on the unit cap.
Okay. Well, I would just say, maybe it's a stylistic observation, but it seems to me like when Peter opened the discussion, he talked about trying to eliminate the distinctions that were drawn in the initial draft around students taking classes outside of their course plan. And this sort of seems to defy that, the way that it reads, and maybe what we're talking about is aligning the BOG waiver students with the common practices of other students. I'm not sure what the language would be, but it just seems to me that this seems, the way it's presented, it seems to cut in a different direction than what I understood to be the logic of Peter's initial observation. So just food for thought.
Thank you.
I would also, following up on Member Ramos, just so I understand. So I'm taking a class at community college and I'm not on a BOG waiver. Are we saying that either currently or in the future, if we adopt these, I'm required to identify a degree, certificate, transfer, or career advancement goal?
If you
Right.
do not, you will not have as high a place in the registration system and might be denied access to courses, at least how it is now. But if you do define a goal, you will,
Okay,
proceed.
So it's
consistent.
It's consistent, so we're not singling out BOG
Correct.
students. Chancellor Scott.
I've said this a lot of times, but I want to say it once more. Unfortunately, because of a lack of money, we are rationing our education. That's not what we wanted to do, but we are. But unfortunately, we're not rationing it in a very intelligent way. And we're simply saying, continuing students first, first-time students second. So the first year when we cut back, we put down 133,000 first-time students. Why was that? Because they were at the back of the line. Now, I don't think, unless there's an unusual reason, that somebody who's been at a community college and is now taking 120 units, or sought to take 120 units and now has completed 50, ought to be ahead of that person who is coming in because they're out of work or because they want to transfer. I think we ought to, or they need basic skills. So I think that we ought to just simply say, if we're going to crowd some people out, then maybe the person who's now taking golf for the 6th time might not ought to be crowding out a student who seriously needs to take chemistry and English. And so this is not, so, some people think that in some way or another we're really against the low-income student. Not at all. It's the low-income student, the first-time low-income student, who's going to get an opportunity now to register, who hasn't had an opportunity to register before. And the person that's in personal enrichment, which there's not anything bad about personal enrichment, but I just don't really believe that somebody who wants to learn how to play the guitar and takes our guitar class ought to be ahead of that first-time student who desperately needs to transfer or who desperately needs to get a certificate in order to get retraining. So let's face the reality. The reality is that we have a wonderful commodity here, and not everybody can avail themselves of it. And somebody who hasn't made any kind of progress after taking 110 units really doesn't deserve to crowd out that person who hasn't even had a first chance.
That's the idea.
So that's all we're doing here, is facing a reality. Now, if the money starts flowing in and we can educate every student that wants to, there ought to be a time when maybe we ought to say, 120 units is enough, move on. But what we're really trying to do is to say here, if we're prioritizing registration, let's do it sensibly. Let's don't do it haphazardly. Let's don't just say continuing students first, first-time students second, regardless. sometimes that continuing student does not deserve registration ahead of the first-time student. And we're trying to determine such things as personal enrichment, and somebody who hasn't completed any units after a certain period of time really doesn't deserve that first place in line. I think some of this is going to serve very well for prevention. When somebody knows that they can't stay in community colleges for the next 6 years, they're more likely to finish their program. Yeah, if we say you can stay as long as you want to, and that's fine, then maybe they don't finish their program. That's it.
Okay, Vice President Perez, and then we're going to have to pick it up a little bit.
My question is actually on 3.4, and I just want some clarification with the follow-up. I just want to ensure that what we're saying is that students don't have to finish their
Correct.
basic skills.
Correct.
Okay?
You are
and then
correct.
secondly, one of the biggest issues for students is that in some campuses, it's a very quick process. On others, it's very drawn out for a whole year. 5.1 addresses that issue, right?
That is the intent of 5.1.
Any other board member comments before we proceed? Okay, Amy.
I'll begin by apologizing that y'all aren't next door. It sounds like they're just having quite
Yeah, a
the
lot more
party
fun
over
than
there.
we are.
Anyone who wants to get up and leave, I won't take offense. I'll try to lighten it up. Chapter 4 is a standalone recommendation and a standalone chapter. Align course offerings to meet student needs. A very simple sentence, a very complicated issue. The general gist of this recommendation is that the community college system really needs to shift from using historical course scheduling patterns. And there are some colleges, not all, but there are some colleges that just sort of roll their class schedules over from semester to semester, and instead start making more informed course schedules based on the academic needs of students to complete their certificates, degrees, and transfer, and combined with sort of state and local data about enrollment trends and job market issues. So originally there were some changes in this recommendation, so let me talk a little bit about that. Originally this recommendation, as the task force was discussing it, did not include some of the components about looking at labor market. And one of the things we heard predominantly from the CEOs in our group was that you ended up in a little bit of a chicken and egg argument. So if you were having student ed plans in the courses students needed to complete their program, driving your entire course schedule, then you never had an opportunity to introduce new academic programs, in things like green technology or other things. So I think of it as a chicken and egg issue. So we made sure to say that this isn't based solely on the needs of students as they existed in this moment. The second change in this recommendation has to do with the funding of courses in students' ed plans. So the original recommendation, the way that the task force got at this issue, and I think of this as, if you think of course offerings and student enrollment, in kind of your Econ 1 context of supply and demand, we just talked about demand on the enrollment side and the enrollment prioritization. This is the supply, and trying to tweak, at least at the margins, the supply to better match the demand of the students. The way that the task force originally went about doing that was to say, we will only provide apportionment funding for courses that are in each individual student's ed plan. That was met with some confusion on behalf of the task force. And what we say now is more globally, which is if you are offering a course on your campus and it's not in anyone's ed plan, then really we shouldn't be paying for it. That seems somewhat common sense to me, at least, but that's the general premise of this recommendation at the moment. The main reason that this recommendation was changed had to do with if an individual course wasn't in an individual student's ed plan, we were going to require the student to essentially pay full freight for the course. The task force did not like that idea at all, and as Peter talked about earlier, was very concerned about developing sort of a two-tier fee system. So we have since removed that provision. The other piece that was albeit somewhat buried, not intentionally, but in this recommendation, had to do with non-credit courses and the course offerings and the non-credit course offerings. And in our original document, I guess our original draft document, we had the recommendation said that we would limit state apportionment funding for non-credit courses that were career development or college preparatory, the CDCP category of non-credit. Well, that did not go over very well, as you can imagine. And we heard from many folks, including our own members and online and in town halls and the like. And it was certainly never the task force did not intend to limit courses, especially ESL courses. That was the population we heard from the most, as well as individuals with acquired brain injuries. Those are some of the examples. So that recommendation has been taken out. But I think that the task force does still want to have a conversation, and as you know, they're meeting Wednesday in Sacramento. And it's my understanding that they want to still have a conversation about non-credit. And in particular, I think there's some areas of non-credit that they think should perhaps receive lower priority or higher priority. I'm not quite sure how to characterize it at this point because they're still going to have the conversation. Like I said, the recommendation that would have limited apportionments to those CDCP courses has been removed. So that's a big notation. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in that recommendation that has changed.
Amy, just one thing I have, just because I don't understand it, on page 45, requirements for implementation. It says we could amend Title V to explicitly allow colleges to enroll community service students without receiving credit. What does that mean?
Community
Peter?
service.
I'll let Peter.
Community service is essentially self-funded courses. Scott, yeah, they pay completely for themselves. Okay, obviously use the facilities and so forth, but the cost of the instructor is paid for by the fees that are charged. So that's called community service.
So the recommendation, and one of the things that we heard from the CIOs in particular, was this notion of allowing colleges to offer blended classes where you would fill a class with your credit-bearing, fee-paying, subsidized students first, and if there was room, allow self-supporting community service class students to fill to the capacity of the class, essentially without credit and paying full freight, was something that they supported. I don't know if there was necessarily consensus amongst all of the task force members that this was the direction they go, but there did seem to be overall support for the notion that you could blend those. And my understanding is that right now we don't allow for courses to be blended in that manner.
Okay, I think I might need a little more education on that one. But any other board member comments on section 4? Member Magomed.
Any examples of courses that might be offered that are not on student education plans, just to give me a for example? You were saying on some campuses there may be courses offered that are not on any student's education plan. Ukulele playing? I don't know. I'm just asking.
We keep using ukulele for seniors as an example. I don't know if I don't have a response for you right now.
Okay, I was just wondering.
A course that would be in no one's ed plan. I mean, it could theoretically be anything.
Well, it could be a student, for example, who has transfer educational plan. So the courses that would be in the ed plan would be all courses that would be transferable to a UC or CSU. But there might be a course, let's say in horticulture or some other area that is more recreational and yet has some real value to it in terms of its academic content and so forth. But it's not in the educational plan, and so there would be a lower priority for those type of courses being offered.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
And I could give a couple examples, and this really gets at the kind of the student's intent with a course. So, for instance, a fitness class. you could have a exercise class that was a 4-credit class that where the credits are actually transferable. So that's a, you know, but in certain communities that course could be offered in such a way that there are no transfer students in the class. So everybody in the class is taking it simply for fitness, in the same way that they could go join the 24-hour fitness down the street, but they're doing it as a gym. Well, so the notion here is that the colleges really need to peer into it and look at not just whether the class is transferable or not, but what is who are the students taking the course? And so whether it's a fitness class or a photography course or a painting course, if the students taking that course are doing it simply for enrichment, simply for, say, the hobbyist student, I think that's what this is trying to get at, is to say that needs to be a lower priority right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're at number 5, Amy?
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Let me, why don't you get through number 5, and then we're going to take a short break.
Certainly. So Chapter 5 is all about improving the education of basic skills students. Chapter 5.1 talks specifically about the need to develop alternative strategies to the traditional basic skills curriculum. As we know, our basic skills students, in particular students who enter our system and show up 4 levels below collegiate level, have abysmal success rates when it comes to actually getting a certificate, degree, or transfer. In some cases, the sequence itself is part of the burden. This recommendation is aimed at redirecting or restructuring some existing funds that we have in place right now, the Basic Skills Initiative dollars, to better support the development of alternative modes of delivery in basic skills.
And I would just add here that there is a great deal of activity taking place on the campuses already that is self-initiated, so that in many respects this reinforces and supports that kind of activities, because obviously the campus people recognize that too long a program hinders the eventual accomplishment of either a degree completion or transfer completion. So a lot of very good work is already taking place, and this is intended to perhaps encourage and expand that.
Very supportive of innovation, but I just want to make sure there's some measurable results attached to that, because we can have some folks come forward and design some programs that really don't help students become successful. So is there something embedded in that regarding the insurance that these programs that are going to be funded are actually programs that are going to, at some point in time, there's a measurement to ensure they actually are helping students succeed quicker than some of the traditional programs?
So 2 things. The first is that this recommendation is like I said earlier, sort of reconfiguring or retargeting, if that's even a word, existing Basic Skills Initiative dollars. So you do have guidelines governing the distribution of those dollars right now. So the recommendation says to the Chancellor's Office to amend those guidelines to effectuate this recommendation. So we're not quite to the implementation stage of saying, what kind of outcomes do you expect from your program? That said, the notion of doing it quicker isn't necessarily a requirement. So this has been a longstanding discussion with the task force surrounding the issue of accelerated basic skills, where some people are very supportive of that model, other people not so much. So rather than endorsing or somehow trying to ratify a particular model of basic skills innovation, the task force is very open-ended by saying, whatever, we just want alternatives to the traditional course sequence. So that can look like whatever you think is going to work. It doesn't necessarily have to be accelerated, as that term is currently being used, or quicker.
So to me, it's not about the acceleration as much as it is about the student being successful. Currently today, there's some campuses where it's taking 4 years for students to get through some of their classes, when there's another campus that's student has same needs, they're getting, in a year and a half, they're getting through that. So to me, it's about helping students be successful quicker, however that might be administered. So that's just my concern.
apologize, I can't write and talk at the same time. Recommendation 5.2, the task force has spent a lot of time on this conversation. First, let me note that the wording of the recommendation itself has changed from the prior version. This is the way we tried to finesse the issue of basic skills and ESL, and is ESL under the umbrella of basic skills. So we're hoping that our wordsmithing helped address that issue. But recommendation 5.2, and I am paraphrasing, but says that the K-12 adult education system has fallen by the wayside with budget cuts, with the categorical flexibility that the K-12 districts are being allowed. Those programs are being rated and somewhat decimated in favor of other district priorities, K-12 district priorities. And as such, our K-12 partners are really trying to manage a system that's no longer as robust as it once was. And given the current population of this state, basic skills is really the highest priority for our adult learners. Recommendation 5.2 says, "Dear legislature, can you please come up with a plan to address this issue?"
This is a particularly important area for the board members, I think, to understand. Because as you all know, adult education and access to it has been a key vehicle for new Americans, if you will, to both learn the language and to compensate for educational deficiencies that might have been present. And the K-12 system really carried the bulk of that through adult education. And what you have is you have a self-imposed by K-12, diminution of activity in that area. The need hasn't gone away, so where do the students go? The students then look at the community college, enroll in the credit program of basic skills, which may not be a good alternative for them in terms of the structure and everything else that's attached to basic skills in the credit program. So what is being stated here, as Amy said, recognize what has happened, recognize the need is still present, and perhaps provide to a much greater extent for the capability of community colleges to meet that need under the non-credit adult education methodology.
So the task force did not go so far as to recommend to you all and to the legislature that it wanted the community colleges system to take responsibility for the entire adult education world. I think if you were to take a straw poll of our task force, you would actually get a fair number of takers on that, as long as the K-12 money came with it, of course. But they weren't quite willing to go that far. But this was really an acknowledgement that the system is a mess, it is deficient, and you have an entire generation of folks that are really falling through the cracks when it comes to adult education.
Member Malamud.
So 2 questions. The K through 12 gets the money now, but they've chosen not to spend it on this issue. Is that correct?
So the K through 12 system, like ours, is structured with apportionment dollars and categorical program dollars. And adult education is a categorical program in K-12. And like our system, also has flexibility amongst many of its categoricals. And adult ed is one of those items that is flexed. So for those K-12 districts that do adult ed, those would be the ones that mirror our, the ones in our system that where the community colleges doesn't hold that responsibility. They have the ability to flex those dollars and use them for other priorities. So that's not, it doesn't mean that universally all of those dollars are being used for some other purpose. But it does mean, and what we have certainly heard from the field, is that by and large we see those programs being cut substantially in K-12 in favor of other K-12 priorities. So, this isn't so much a criticism, this recommendation is not designed to be a criticism of K-12, but it is designed to say we have a problem on our hands. And I'm not entirely convinced that when the legislature adopted its categorical flexibility provisions for K-12, that it really understood that this was going to be a potential ramification when it chose to flex adult ed in K-12.
And then my second question / comment is, I have heard from the legislators of the past that they think that K through 12 teachers are better at this than the community college, just because community college teachers are a higher skill level, and this is something that doesn't require a higher skill level. English language learners.
We need a 3-day conference to address that one.
I will just say, I'm just giving you a little hint. The legislature may not have a great answer or the answer you want.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break.